So we're gonna get ready for our last panel session. I'm gonna bring Rafe on the screen and I'm gonna bring Lars on the screen because those are panelists and they are awesome because they know a lot about these things. And like I really liked your presentation, Rafe. Started off with the oxidation, started off very strong. Um talked a lot about the information that we need to have. And you touched a little bit on some of the things that I know we're going to talk about here in this session, because this session is all about the new technologies in the lubrication space, and that we know that things just keep evolving constantly, which is, great because we need to keep evolving. Um, I know as well, we spoke about laws, we spoke about stuff that Fluitec is doing and, creating that change in the space as well. So, what I want to talk and, sort of bring to the audience today is just trying to wrap our minds around what are the new technologies that you're seeing in this space today? Are we seeing more things related to formulations? Rafe, I'm gonna start with you, of course, because you're on this side of me today. So I'm starting with you. This, tonight, today, you'll do today.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, new stuff. There's always new stuff,
Yeah.
right? Trying to think of things that come to mind. So, you know, everyone's under pressure for
Yeah.
the sustainability
Yep.
criteria. So whether that's regulatory, whether it's business oriented, sometimes it's top down, sometimes it's bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
So an example would be like I get a lot more requests for bio products, um,
Ah.
not necessarily looking for EALs, but
Hmm.
looking for bio products. And at the moment, because people's understanding of that sort of field is relatively minimal, unless they come from like the
Yeah.
marine or the sort of like the water industry.
That's
A
very
lot of the
important.
time, people are just looking for like the word bio
I
to be in the
know.
name of the
That's what
product.
I'm just gonna ask you straight out. Like, why are they asking for the bio? Is it
Yeah.
that they have to put that in because of the industrial standards? Especially we're talking about because I know you can handle for Australia. Lars may jump in here and tell us a little bit about Asia and how that's affecting that part of the market. But why are they looking for that bio in their oil?
Yeah, so most of the time, like unfortunately, it's probably to tick a box, to be able to say that
Always,
they've
always.
done their due diligence. So
Uh-huh.
I see that in a lot of instances. So it's kind of like a CYA on
Mm-hmm.
hey, what
Yep.
if we have a hydraulic oil leak? How do we sort of like
Yeah.
minimize our regulatory exposure? In some cases, there might be close to water sources,
Mm-hmm.
town water, something like that,
Yes.
and again looking to kind of minimize exposure without necessarily understanding the ins and outs of readily versus inherently biodegradable. What are the trade-offs that you need to make when you're sourcing biodegradable products? The difference between natural and synthetic esters,
Right.
and there's always trade-offs with that kind of thing, right? So
Yeah.
that would be one trend,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of formulations. And I know there's a lot of work, let's say, for example, on trying to get PFAS out of
Right.
all the formulations, right? So, for anyone who's unaware, PFAS kind of falls under the umbrella of something that you might have heard of being called forever chemicals. So, PFOAs, for example, which, Teflon used to
Yeah.
be made from PFOAs, although that's pretty much been eliminated from the supply chain there. And the idea is that these chemicals, they never break down.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're sort of present long term and they tend to accumulate in sort of like the food chain. A little bit like, let's say mercury in tuna, right? So some of the
Mm.
heavy metals, which people can be concerned about. So, there's a big drive to remove those out of lubricants. In terms of other new technologies on the formulation side, so I do a bit of work with a company called Neol. So I spoke a little bit actually in my session about
Yes.
um, kind of like the zinc molecule, how
Mm-hmm.
popular it is, and how it served us really well, but there are some limitations to it. For example, at high temperatures where it turns into sludge, and so
Mm-hmm.
Neil's doing some really cool work around
Yeah.
sort of like a copper alternative, copper based alternative, and there's precedent for that. So there's a company called Paramons which eventually got
Mm-hmm.
merged into Infinium. No, maybe it was into Infinium. They had a copper based PIBSA style anti-wear additive way back in the 1970s, which was very effective, but it was just too expensive to mass produce.
Right.
So Neol's kind of like it's not that style of molecule, but
Mm-hmm.
it does an anti-wear and antioxidant job.
Right.
Um, there's also even like new polymers coming to the market,
Yes.
or for example, like existing polymers which are seeing like new uses. So there's a polymer that Lubrizol sells under the brand Lucant.
Mm-hmm.
Dalium sells under the same name. Well, not under the same name, but they call theirs Synol. But
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of chemically identical. So it's a ethylene propylene copolymer.
Right.
Um, and they are a viscosity modifier slash VI improver slash thickener,
Yeah.
um, which can sort of replace like a very heavy PAO, as an example. So it tends to be a little bit cheaper. And these things have a viscosity index of like 300. So for use in things like hydraulic oils, they can be very effective. So there's like always new innovations kind of
Mm-hmm.
going on. Um, we can go down the rabbit hole
Oh
of
yes.
any particular
Hmm.
one.
So I'm gonna bring Lars into the conversation a little bit. Like,
Yeah,
what are you seeing in terms of what's going on the Asia side of the market,
yeah, I
especially with
think
what Rafe is talking about?
yeah, I think you can approach this question from various levels, right? So I think
Mm-hmm.
in terms of formulations, we have seen quite a lot of advancements
Yep.
in terms of low zinc formulations in the automotive industry over the years. We've gone to lower SAPs formulations, for example. Also, I think generally, especially in the Asian market, the availability of higher grade base stock has improved a lot over the years. Um,
Yeah.
but of course, this has also had some road bumps. I love that Rafe talked about
Yes.
polymers. I've been involved a lot in that in the past through my career in working in an additive company, so I know about Lucant very well, and also these hydrogenated styrenic polymers, which are now sometimes used in hydraulic applications as well to create higher viscosity index fluids. And also these actually have some benefits in terms of friction when they are applied to
Mm-hmm.
engine oil, so they actually contribute to fuel economy. So these are advancements that are ongoing in formulations. But I think when you look at this on a high level kind of thing, there was always a cocktail of factors like global
Yep.
availability of raw materials, price competition, different markets have different demands, end users have demands that all have kind of a limiting effect on how these advancements really get to the end user, right? And I think what we see that there's an enormous variety in performance of oils that are available to the end user. So I mean a huge difference between, let's say, a low performing and a high performing oil, and it's very difficult to discern for the end user unless they
Yep.
have lubrication expertise. So if you would ask me what is actually the biggest advancements over the biggest advancement over the last decades, I would say end user education, and I think
Mm.
all of us on this panel has played some role in that. You guys to a much greater extent than myself. But there are today enormous amounts of educational material and data available to end users, right? So they are now able to solve issues or to find out how they can solve issues like contamination, varnish deposits, how they extend their oil life. And you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
already a little bit about Fluitec, our company. We have a program called Fill for Life,
Yep.
where we can extend the life of a fluid as much as the life of the equipment. So that has all huge impacts on finance and also the environment. So I think from an end user perspective, if I would take that perspective, I think having more access to knowledge, training, and more options to solve their reliability issue to increase their profit in a sustainable way, I think that's actually the biggest advancement we've seen over the last, let's say, decade, especially in industrial oils, I would say.
Yeah, because I think what we've realized over the definitely over the last decade is that, and this is going to make all of us here sound very old, is that we saw the introduction of the internet and the things that it can do, and in terms of connecting people and being able to have that
Exactly.
free flow of information. So I know people that are younger than us, and I'm just going to leave it at that, younger than us, may not know what it's like before, actually having access, readily available access to all of this information. And I think that the rate at which we're actually evolving, don't even start talking about AI and machine learning and all of these great things. Um, we are advancing at a higher rate than we may be able to keep up, especially for our end users. And our end users, they need to be educated as much as possible, because they're the ones using the equipment. They're the ones that need to know what's going on the inside, and how do you actually deal with the issues that are happening afterwards. So I think that part is very important for them, and just making sure that they can actually know what can happen. So I love the fact that we talked about formulation, because I think formulation is always changing, because we're always getting new ideas and new ways to do things. But that doesn't happen unless you step outside of the box. And I know Neol is definitely stepping outside of the box in the way that they're doing new formulations and just thinking about things a lot differently than we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. So pushing the limits, hats off to Leah and her entire team, because she's doing a great job. Just going to tell her that one time. But we've seen what's going on with formulations. And I know, Lars, you talked a little bit about, having that longer oil life. So do you think that in the near future, because we're moving towards a more sustainable future,
Hmm.
do you see that we would probably not be using oils as consumables in the future, and
Hmm.
rather more as assets?
Yeah, great question. Well, technically, that's definitely possible. It's a matter of getting this kind of discipline and education
Yeah.
with the end user to do that. And in essence, you are competing with the status quo. So the key here is educating the end user of the possibility. But technically speaking, in a lot of industrial oils, yes, it is possible to at least, let's say, double the life of the oil in many cases, purely by keeping the base oil from being decomposed through um, the degradation methods that you
Yes.
have described, Sanya. There are ways that you can do that um, today already. And I always like to draw this comparison between the automotive world and the
Yes.
industrial world, because in the automotive industry, you've seen enormous advancements in terms of
Yeah.
how long an oil can be used, right? You talk a little bit about age, but when I was young, I knew that my parents they had to change their oil probably every 7,000 to 8,000 kilometers, right? And
Ah,
now that's probably 30,000 kilometers for an engine oil that has a combustion process inside and all these enormously challenging environments that this oil has to deal with. So that's an enormous evolution. But in the industrial world, we have not seen this. But the
mm,
technology exists to achieve a similar sort of revolution. So it's technically definitely possible. It depends
mm-hmm.
on how much ownership there is at the end user to actually implement this, and
Right.
that's also a challenge for us to offer this to them in terms of education and product availability, of course.
It starts with the education process. It starts with letting people know what we can and cannot do and
Yeah,
how we could achieve it. So
exactly.
I do have a question from Miko Guzman to you, Lars, and
Hmm.
he's asking about the oil. I think he's talking about Fill for Life. He's talking about how would you extend the life of the base oil? Is it by filtering, or are you adding some sort of additive to it?
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think he's asking, how do you get to that how do you get to that stage where the oil is basically filled for life?
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a couple of phases. We have to
Mm.
start with doing preventive tests, right? So instead of
Yeah,
waiting for the oil to physically change, you talked a little
yeah,
bit about asset numbers in your presentation, Sanya. So that's a physical change of the oil, right? So we want to act before that happens. So we need to do preventive analysis. Let's say ruler or NPC are good methods to do that. Once we have established this baseline, we now know the health of your oil. And then we can choose indeed to do filtration if that's the best option in this case. That will depend on the condition of the oil, but also the application, right? Because it's easier to put a filter unit in a big turbine than, let's say, a plastic
yeah,
injection molding machine, right? So there are practical aspects to consider. In some cases, it might be beneficial. Let's say we have increased bearing temperatures and we need a quick solution, then it might be better to add a solubility enhancer to the oil, which can quickly dissolve these deposits that are generating the heat in the bearings. We can nowadays, which is a revolution that's coming in the industrial world, I think,
yeah,
we can re-additize oils, which is we coming from the lubricant and additive industry.
yeah.
Before this was a big no-no, but now we can safely re-additize oils. That means we can indeed put additives into your oils, which essentially bring the oil back to its new condition. So it's a reset button that we
Hmm.
can press without having to change the oil, just by adding something to your oil, which can be done in a completely safe and risk-free way. So I think these are revolutionary ways how we can achieve a fill for life.
Yeah, and it's all about the evolution and changing formulations and
Yeah.
understanding back to the beginning how the varnish occurs and how you can be able to actually reduce that aspect. So I do have a question, and I believe this one is really for you, Rafe. Ahmed is asking, do you feel that the mineral oils, especially group one, will disappear, or do you think they will continue using monograde oils, especially for marine applications? Because I know marine applications as a whole different field in that they have all of their straight weight oils because of their larger engines and whatever else they have going on that side. So, what do you think? Do you think the mineral oils are gonna disappear, or are the
Yeah,
dinosaurs coming or not?
personally,
You know?
I don't think they're disappearing anytime soon. The group ones um, are not disappearing because they're, let's say, for example, undesirable.
Hmm.
It's mostly a commercial consideration.
Right.
Right? So they're just the group one plants are very old. It's very expensive
Yeah.
to keep them running, and it's hard to justify, basically the investment in new plants.
Yeah.
Right? And the group one, the way I understand the technology anyway, is that they usually sit alongside sort of like fuel refining. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, so the market is kind of headed towards group two, group three territory, and that's a combination of factors, right? Part of it
Hmm.
is engine oils, which generally drive the market, right? Because you remember, engine oils are probably 50% of the lubricants market.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So where they go, everyone else follows.
Yeah.
And lubricants, just there's not that much demand for Group One either,
Hmm.
and so that's why we're starting to see it kind of disappear from formulations. So everything's sort of headed towards Group Two, Group Three. On
Yep.
top of that, you get a lot of OEMs demanding a level of oxidation stability out of the oil
Yes.
that Group One just can't meet. So again,
Yeah.
that's another driver. So then the second question, sort of the second part of the question is, well, do mineral oils disappear completely? And
Mm.
it like, yeah, you could see that's a possibility. I don't know that it happens in our lifetime though, right? Because it's things tend to move pretty slow in this
Yeah.
industry. The way that approvals run is also pretty
They
slow,
do.
and the alternatives at the moment are just so much more expensive
Yeah.
that in a lot of instances it's very difficult to justify. So I go to a lot of plants, and we speak to the education piece, right? Where there just isn't the level of knowledge required to maintain synthetic oils and get the most use out of them.
Yeah.
So, as much as it would be awesome for everyone to convert to PAOs and PAGs and esters
Oh
and get
yeah.
all the long life associated with it, you know, if you put in a fancy new PAO gear oil and then contaminate it on day one, there's
That's gonna
really
hurt.
no point, right? And so because there are so many sites out there that are really hurting for people, you know, I don't see the market moving away from mineral oils
Yeah.
anytime soon. Now, just on the marine side, you know, there's definitely been changes in marine. Like if you
Oh
look at,
yeah.
say, for example, like the TBN numbers have dropped
Yes.
dramatically, but that's more got to do with the quality of the fuel coming in. So
Yeah.
IMO 2020 really changed the game for
Yeah. They
levels of
had to.
sulfur in fuel, which ironically might have made the climate change problem worse, but that's a whole separate issue altogether. But yeah, so the change in fuel standards is in large part what's driving changes in the formulations there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also what's interesting in this aspect is on the availability side, right? It's extremely difficult to produce synthetic, and it's
Right.
not readily available everywhere. And I know, for example, in the metalworking industry, a couple of years ago, there were some issues because suddenly the availability of Group 1
Yep.
was going down and the prices were above a Group 2 for a while. So it became more
Yeah.
expensive. But there's also some need for these products still, and you cannot replace, in my opinion, all of them with a synthetic anytime soon.
Yeah. And I think as well that we go back to the education process always because that's where it starts. And if we do not educate the end users on doing that switch to synthetics, they will not fully appreciate why you have to do that switch. And if they do not appreciate it, they're not going to do it. They're not going
Exactly.
to stand. They're not going to stand by you and say, okay, yes, we're
No.
not going to have anything going into this oil. We're going to protect it to our life or try. Um, but helping them understand what's going on with their oil, why they're doing these changes, I think education is the definitely the foundation all the time for anything that we do. But we also need to know and acknowledge that we are evolving and certain things are going to have to go away,
Yeah.
like those base one oils. Unfortunately, they've served their time. But if it's becoming too expensive and it's becoming more of, a cost involved compared to moving up. And then you see it as well with the oxidation numbers. Like we have the smaller sum sizes, we have the higher stresses on the oil. So you can't necessarily ask that for an oil that was, developed back in the 1950s. The additive packages are not going to cut it. Definitely not going to cut it. So evolution is very important. And I think we have so many things going on for us today in terms of everything that's happening. So we talked about formulation, we talked about the synthetic oils, the mineral oils, what's going to stay, what's not going to stay. I'm going to shift a little bit to talk about sensors. What do you think is going to happen with sensors and how how viable are they for the future? Because, and I'm just going to put it out there, a sensor at the end of the day is still a capacitance that you're translating into a particular number. Correct? Correct is
Depends on
right.
the time. Depends on the kind of sensor, right?
It
Um,
depends. It definitely depends on
so
what type of sensor.
so just maybe to try and tie it to the previous question. This is something I've been thinking about for a little while. I think that to an extent, the industry needs to come to a bit of a reckoning of how do we improve the lubrication programs without education.
Yep.
So as much as like I'm, pro educating and all the rest of that, we've kind of been on this exercise for about 40 years. And I wouldn't say that the level of knowledge across industry has dramatically
Yep.
improved. So either we have to change the way that we're educating end users, or we've got to look at ways of how do we improve the reliability of lubrication programs and just realize
Right.
that people are just never going to pick it up. And that there are a variety of reasons for
Oh
why that's
yeah.
the case. Now, I think sensors can play a part in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if there's anything that they can do to help kind of automate tasks, part of automation is you need that feedback loop with data.
Yes.
And so, yeah, while sensors are kind of in their infancy at the moment, and there are limitations to what they can give you, credible information on, I do see them as being an essential part of kind of the maintenance of lubricants
Mm-hmm.
going forward, because to a certain extent, I think, yeah, there is a level of education that we're almost never going to get past.
No.
Yeah. I like to slightly disagree with
Oh
Rafe there a
boy.
little bit, because what I see in the market space is that the level of education depends on the value of the oil within the company.
Mm,
So if you have a power plant that has, let's say, 250,000 liters of oil, there tends to be someone that takes it very seriously.
yeah.
At least in Asia, I don't have any experience with Australia and New Zealand on that part, but I guess that would be the same or even higher. But it really depends on, I admire reliability engineers, or everyone that's responsible for the reliability, because they have to be so multidisciplinary,
Yeah.
and their main level of competence is mainly in engineering usually. And they are usually very very busy with a lot of priority. So they have limited time to be a lubrication expert, which is actually a part that is required for them to maintain reliability, right? So sensors play a part in making their job a lot easier in the future. I think to have this extra step, this extra data point for a reliability manager or engineer to get easy access to their oil condition in a way that they can
Mm-hmm.
easily interpret. I think that sensors will evolve to a way that we can calibrate them to give this additional data point. This also takes away a little bit of the pollution that we see in sampling, right? That's
Uh,
happening, mistakes being made in sampling. Um, However, I think they will, at least not in the foreseeable future, replace oil condition monitoring programs and
oh no.
the traditional way of doing things, because simply, yeah, I don't think there's a way of getting the in-depth uh, look into the oil, the data that you need
Mm-hmm.
to really properly assess the oil's condition. But who knows, that might evolve in the future.
Next
But
5 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah,
At the
yeah.
rate
In
that
fact,
we're moving, next 5 years.
yeah. It would be great to have some kind of a sensor on each, let's say, larger oil sump turbines that can give you an idea of the amount of antioxidants in the oil,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of contaminants, particles, and
Right.
the varnish potential of the oil. That would give the end user already a great data point without having
Yeah.
to go through the trouble of sampling and sending it to a lab. That might be a benefit to them, making their job a lot easier.
It would be.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like at the end of the day, the entire premise behind oil analysis is to continually you know, monitor a particular condition, make
Hmm.
sure that you have enough data to make an informed decision of what's going on. If are you having like increases, decreases, you're seeing things that are fluctuations, you know,
Hmm.
being able data is the most important thing, and it has been a bit of a stumbling block for a lot of
Hmm.
people who are trying to get into condition monitoring with their equipment,
Yeah.
and they're like, we don't have the budget for it, we can't do it, we can never do it. When it breaks down, though, everybody wants to do an oil analysis to figure out what happened, but at that point it's a little bit too late.
Hmm.
But still, being able to bring that level of awareness
Hmm.
to your end users
Hmm.
and making sure that they can actually, you know, I want to say read the information and interpret the information, because having the data is one thing,
Hmm.
but being able to use the data is a total different thing. Because
Absolutely.
sometimes we have people collecting the data and they just don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So I do have a question. And I think it's Harris Hassan is actually asking. He's asking Rafe, and Rafe, you decide if you can or cannot elaborate a little bit about the unintentional negative impact on the climate change issue that you recently spoke about. But
Oh, yeah,
it's up to
that's on the
you.
marine one. Yeah, no. There's a decent amount of data which suggests that so sulfur emissions that come from the marine shipping industry
Mm-hmm.
um, are basically uh, kind of net reflective to to
Uh,
uh, like radiation. And
mm,
so the sulfur emissions, a little bit like after you have a volcanic eruption,
right.
right? You get the dark clouds that end up in the atmosphere, and they tend to cause a slight, very, very minor dip in global temperatures um,
Mm,
because of, basically radiation being reflected back into space. There is evidence that the sulfur that was in marine fuels was actually promoting that sort of reflectance. And so
oh,
by scrubbing all the sulfur out of marine fuels, we've actually allowed more absorption of radiation into the Earth's atmosphere.
okay.
Wow.
And there are theories that you know, extreme heat waves that we've sort of seen over the past 12
Mm-hmm.
months may have been in part caused by the reduction in sulfur as a result of the IMO 2020 regulations. Now,
Wow.
passing that out, the physics, it stacks up and it makes a lot of sense. How much is causative versus correlative
Mm-hmm.
is that's up for debate.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I
Always
wasn't aware of
something to
that.
think about there.
No.
Definitely something to think about there. But we spoke about varnish at the beginning of the session. And, I am going to go back to it because, I love talking about varnish. Um, what do you think we can have going on for the future in terms of helping users to either identify varnish earlier on or even be able to mitigate against that? Like, what do you think we can put in place? Or do you think that there are things that people can put in place from now, not just wait for the future, but, how do we get to save our equipment, I would say? So I'm gonna, wow, Rafe or Lars, who do I want to answer this first? I'm gonna drop Lars into it. What do you
Okay.
think?
Ruler and NPC test for everyone.
Oh yeah.
That's the start.
Start there. Start with the monitoring of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really where it has to start with, right? The
Mm-hmm.
availability of tests. I think it came up in the presentation earlier as well.
Right.
In some regions there are still, and I do agree with Rafe on, in some areas you just cannot get the level of education that you need, but also
Mm-hmm.
the availability of tests is in some cases an issue.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that we have to think about, or that the end user also has to push for with their laboratory in the region to make a test like Ruler MPC available, or invest in their own test and oil condition monitoring program. I think that's the basis where it starts, because you cannot fix what you don't measure, right? So
Yes.
there, that's definitely the baseline. And after that, there's a lot of technology now available to mitigate varnish. The oil companies will play a role in this as well, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of changing formulation and having a higher emphasis on that. And I think they can also play a role in educating their customers on how to mitigate varnish, and engage in partnerships with third parties that are specializing in
Right.
this area, either for education or for actually solving the varnish issue at the
Yeah.
customer site. So I think they have a major role to play in this. They are the ones that are selling the oil to the customer, so they're also the
Yes.
obvious ones
Responsible.
responsible to educate the customer on how they can mitigate varnish. And they have to recognize this as well. So I think these are the major aspects, let's say, very practical in the short term, that we can look at. I mean, the technology is available for
It's
varnish-free oils. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is really to get the end user access to the right test, and then uh,
good.
the right knowledge to take the right action. I think that's where the crux is at the moment.
All right, Rafe, I know you want to add something to that.
Yeah, what can I add? Lars already answered it pretty well. So I think, yeah, I mean, ruler and NPC for all would be like the ideal scenario, right?
Yeah.
In practice, uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, obviously it's a much more expensive
Yes.
test plate, and so it's unlikely. But there are alternatives to it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
let's say, for example, for hydraulic systems,
Mm-hmm.
there's a decent number of kind of FTIR analogs,
Right.
right, that can get you to an amine and a phenol result. And it's maybe it doesn't have the same degree of accuracy as the full-on ruler test, but
Hmm.
we've seen that move across other tests as well, right? So a lot of TAN and
Right.
TBN tests are done by chemometrics now versus like an actual, uh, you know, uh, what it used to be potentiometry.
Titration. Yeah. Yeah.
So so there's precedent for it, and I think that would be one instance where taking into account the level of training that
Mm-hmm.
the end users have would be useful, right? Because ruler is one of those tests where, yeah, for turbine operators who live and die by oil analysis and pay a lot of
Yeah.
close attention to it, you can
Hmm.
put an amine and a phenol rating on an oil analysis test, and there's going to be an understanding of what that is.
Right.
For the vast majority of people working with general hydraulics, mining hydraulics,
No.
and that sort of work, is it practical for them to understand it? Probably not. But
No.
if we could turn like a general infrared result into something like, you know, oxidation reserve remaining, and just give
Yes.
them a percentage,
Hmm.
everyone understands a number that goes from 100% to zero,
Yes.
right? In terms of life remaining, and so that would be an easy one. Well, I say a relatively easy one to add to standard oil analysis tests, without having to get too far into the weeds.
Oh gosh, yeah. Because, like, again, it goes back to your end users at the end of the day. If they are not happy and they are not satisfied and they don't know what they're doing this for, then they're not going to invest in it. They're not going to have as much, drive to get it done, because you can have, and like this is like a dream come true. You have every plant with ruler and MPC, and they have all of the equipment, they have everything available to them. But if your end users don't know how to use it or how to interpret the results, then it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
You've
absolutely.
just wasted a bunch of resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it definitely always goes back
Hmm.
foundation, education, making sure people understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and
Hmm.
maybe how they should do it as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. I love that idea of simplifying that for the end user. That's definitely
Yes.
would be a big step forward. And
Always.
I would also maybe uh, to throw something in here. I'm very excited to see the role of the digitalization
Hmm.
revolution that's going on now, and AI in this
Yes.
area, right? And this is really a bit of out of the box thinking. But what role could AI programs in the future play
Hmm.
for end users? Let's say that they would have a subscription, and there would be some cloud of data that gets interpreted by
Yeah.
AI, so they would always have access to a proper interpretation of oil tests. You know, that might be something that AI could fulfill if it would be, let's say, how do you say that, constructed properly and set up
Yeah,
and
trained with the
trained
right
properly. Yeah,
individuals. Yes,
yeah,
right,
exactly.
the right models. Because I think
Yeah.
one of the drawbacks with AI is being able to train the model
Mm-hmm.
with the information and the data that we currently have,
Mm-hmm.
because these three models here can think very differently and think outside of the box compared to what is programmed into an AI
Yeah.
software, and
Yeah.
that's what makes us different.
Yeah.
That's what
Exactly.
sets us apart.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe you get a clone in the future. I don't know. Something to happen.
That will be after my retirement then.
Oh boy. Okay, yes, after you've gotten all of the information. Yes, perfect, Lars. Perfect. And I just wanna bring it back. I'm gonna bring it back to you, Rafe. We always talk about the basics of oil is that you need to keep it clean. You need to always make sure it doesn't have any water, keep it clean, keep it dry. how do you think those very simple measures can be adapted to, you know, new technology? How do we get more people aware of just doing the basics right and getting that done? I know it comes back to education, but still, I'm going to throw that to you.
Yeah. So maybe to tie it into the idea of sensors, right? I don't think we need to
Mm,
reinvent the wheel, but um, even to make particle counts more visible,
yeah,
right? So there's plenty of inline particle counters that are available now.
right.
Yeah, they're a little bit expensive, but
Yeah.
they can at least display particle count as a number, right?
Hmm.
And everyone gets the idea of number goes down is good, right?
Right.
That's
Yep.
relatively simple concept. But the power of that is, let's say for example, like tons of sites that I would go to have a little filter cart that they run around with,
Right.
right? Plug into different systems, and
Mm-hmm.
you kind of always you point at the filter cart and say, well, how long do you put that on the hydraulic unit?
Yes.
They say 12 hours or 24 hours or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the number is. And, a very basic question. Well, how do you know that that's long enough?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Where was the particle count and where is
Right.
it now that you've finished with your filtration? And in general, there is no sense of like what is dirty and what is clean, simply
Mm-hmm.
because there's no representation of the numbers.
Right.
Versus, we plug in the unit and it's reading a whatever it is, 25, 23, you know, 18 or something like that. And then after a number of hours, that number has gone down
Right.
to whatever is the site acceptable level, 16,
Mm-hmm.
14, 11, or whatever it might be. So part of it's just simply making that visible, right? And
Mm-hmm.
now we've got inline particle counters, we've got the relative humidity sensors. And so in terms of keeping it clean and dry, that's
Yep.
2 out of 3, right?
Yeah.
And a temperature sensor is very cheap. So
That's,
keeping it clean, cool, and dry, all of a sudden you can sort of achieve all 3 of those things. But without the visibility on the number,
yeah.
you're kind of
There's
chasing
nothing.
ghosts. So that's one area where it's not like a revolutionary new technology.
Mm-hmm.
Inline particle counters have been around for a while, but
Yep.
you know, uh, their use could definitely be expanded.
Oh yeah. Laws. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't. I think Rafe covered it pretty well.
Yeah.
I just, in general, I think it's a great idea and initiative that I hope would be picked up to
Yeah.
basically simplify the way that end users, especially in the hydraulic segment,
Yeah.
can do an oil analysis test that's relevant to them, that gives them a data point to act on, because that's generally speaking a, let's say, a limitation that we see in particularly that market. We now
Mm-hmm.
really, when we talk to the hydraulic industry, or people that use hydraulics, we tend to talk more about the mechanical aspects that they see as a result of um, oil degradation, instead of really looking at the oil itself, because simply there's no knowledge or no access to data for them in many cases. So,
Yeah. So I
so
always say, yeah, take it back to the basics,
yeah,
back to the foundations. Make sure you get those three main things right. And they're not difficult to do though, but they are difficult things to get people to start to do
yeah,
and to start to think about it and the effects that it can actually have on your system. So just get the basics right before you
mm-hmm.
go into advanced AI and all of these sensors and all of these great things. Just get the basics right. That's
Yeah.
that's the main thing that you need to do. So I don't see any other questions from our audience, but I know and Mark, thank you for staying up with us. Let me just say that. He was talking about the cost of sensors, maybe a big reason why they are not being installed. And I think that may have some part to play. I think as well another part to play is change, and the humans resist change as much as possible, especially in this industry. We do not like it one bit.
Mm-hmm.
And if we start seeing things changing, we're like, nope, nope, we're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that culture goes back to culture as well. Culture has a lot to do with it, as you know. Definitely, culture is the one that drives it as well. So, do we? I know, Neol couple, they're doing a lot of things, you know, definitely thinking outside of the box in terms of formulation. We spoke a little bit about sensors. We spoke a little bit about the basics, the actual basics. Is there anything else you all want to talk about in terms of the new technologies that we actually have in the lubrication space? Because I think we are evolving on all different aspects.
Hmm.
The starting off with the oil, first and foremost, next to the monitoring of the oil
Hmm.
sensors, and then actually having it running in the machine while it's in operation. So I
Hmm.
think those are kind of the main things that we could focus on with lubrication technologies. The other
Hmm.
main thing is education, and we know that's the part that we need to get down very much to make
Yeah,
sure a lot of more people understand it. And Mark is saying the basics are the most important. Yes,
I agree.
definitely,
Yeah. I
definitely the
think
most
in
important.
terms of that behavioral aspect and innovation, we can now also better calculate and chart, let's say, the benefits to the end user. I think there are more tools available nowadays to do this. So um, I talk about value of oil, right? For a
Yeah.
power plant, that's very clear. That's why I used that example earlier. But when you go to a hydraulic, let's say plastic injection molding
Hmm.
uh, plant that maybe has 2,000 liters of oil in operation, right? To them, it's just much less of a uh,
Yeah.
visible, tangible value that they have in their systems, and they don't know that they can have much less mechanical issues and much
Yeah.
higher profitability. And now we can calculate that based on fixed calculations that we have set up together with universities. We call we use what we call a value impact calculator for that.
Hmm.
And the numbers we are getting out of that is surprising. You know, even with smaller volumes of oil,
Right.
if you are able to increase reliability, it's the savings are enormous, and that would make that behavioral change. If we, let's say, incorporate that also in the education, that would make that behavioral change easier, and maybe an investment in extra oil condition monitoring programs or sensors, would make that more viable from a managerial level, because of course they also have to get the approval from
Yeah.
whoever managing the company to do an extra investment. So it's not just unwillingness to change, but it's often also a commercial aspect and managers that don't see the value. So I think that's also an important part of innovation, that we have to use all available tools to
Yep.
make visible to the end user what is, or to the company, let's say, not even just the end user in terms of the reliability engineer, but the company that is operating the machines even a C-suite level. What are the benefits on a sustainability aspect, in the sustainability area, but also the profitability area? I think there's a lot we can do with technology there as well.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. Rafe, you want to add anything to that?
Not hugely. I think, I mean, it's mostly been covered. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of really cool, like, new toys and new technology out there.
Yep.
It's my experience is it's more how well is it implemented in the field
Mm.
that is often the determining factor in whether this stuff is successful or not.
Hmm.
So you know, even if we extended beyond sort of liquid lubricants into the greasing world, right?
Oh yeah.
Uh, like there's a whole
That's a whole
realm
different
Yeah.
different thing.
incorrect greasing practices, um, and new technologies out there, right?
Yep.
Like all these ultrasonic systems which can
Hmm.
dispense grease based on feedback from the bearing. Um, like huge advance.
Yep.
Um, but
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah,
I've
compared
had
to the screwdriver that they used
yeah,
before.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But I've heard mixed things about their implementation in the field as well, right? So
Hmm.
um, a lot of this comes back to are we getting the basics right?
Hmm. Always, always with the basics. You have to get the basics right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How,
Yeah.
how do you see the genuine question that I have? How do you see the involvement of materials influencing the lubrication space? I was at a tribology conference in Japan a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
And there were people saying there, oh, and in sometime in the future there will be no more need for lubricant. And I
Mm,
don't think I believe that, but I just,
Yeah.
would like to hear
yeah.
your thoughts
I
on
mean,
that.
again, like it's possible, but maybe just not in our
Hmm.
lifetime,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're talking. I mean, I go to sites sometimes where the assets that are in use were built in the 1940s still, and they're still
Hmm.
functioning
Yep.
perfectly well.
Yep.
So that suggests that there are assets out there which have been commissioned this year, which won't get taken out of service for another 70 years, 70,
Yeah.
80 years, right? So to an extent, yeah, maybe the volumes will drop. I can't see it vanishing completely in our
Yeah.
lifetime. Now, from this is something that I always try to tell people is that from a career standpoint, if you are in the lubricants industry, right, the number of people is shrinking faster than the volume is.
Yeah.
So if you're worried about a career, just know that the unit volume per person is going up, right? So in terms of career
Reassuring.
opportunity, you're fine, right?
Oh
Now, how does
gosh.
that progress long term?
Mhm.
No one's got a perfect crystal ball, but um, yeah. So like, let's say for example, with materials, I see that sort of affecting maybe lubricant selection maybe a little bit more
Mhm.
than completely removing lubricants altogether. So an example might be with tighter manufacturing tolerances, the gearbox surface finish has gotten dramatically better,
Yep.
and
Mhm.
with improved surface texture, hey, you can start to reduce the viscosity of the oil that you're using,
Mhm.
or with reduced amounts of backlash. Like if you look at wind turbine gearboxes and how well they're manufactured now, um, most of the next generation wind turbine gear oils have kind of eliminated or almost done away with sulfurized olefins as an
Yeah.
extreme pressure additive, right?
Mhm.
They're generally heterocyclic amines and sort of ashless phosphorus is the anti-wear combination. So and that is a direct result of the wind turbine gearbox manufacturers being able to manufacture to such tight tolerances, right?
Yeah.
Very little backlash on such an enormous gearbox.
Yeah.
Um, so I see that piece evolving, but getting rid of lubricants altogether is,
Yeah.
and the good news is, even if they got rid of lubricants altogether, I mean, tribology is the
Can be.
understanding of how materials,
Yeah.
interact, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that'll
Yep.
be and that'll be there forever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because like a lot of people don't realize that you do have tribology with different aspects of your life, like chocolate or even clothes or anything that moves. You know, that's what it is. You have to make
Yeah.
sure that you have that. So it doesn't just apply to oil. I mean, we know about it for oil because like we work in it and
Mhm.
everything is about reducing friction. But at the end of the day, it can be applied to so many different things. So I really don't think lubricants are gonna go away per se right now. I
Mhm.
think that we have a culture of being resistant to change. So it's going to take a lot more for us to get there as a mindset before we get there, you know, physically and actually have that conversation because there are, as Rafe said, there are assets that have been around for more than 70 years. And the way that, I mean, if you look at manufacturing processes from back then to now, that's another question that we need to ask if they are being built to that standard anymore. But topic of a different conversation there, totally different. But
Yeah.
definitely, culture plays a big part in it. Just being able to have that mindset and getting people to understand that. So I think, and like Mark says, there's always going to be friction. Always, we live in, on this planet, so there is going to be friction unless we move to another one. But we can't say that right now.
Yeah.
But I know I don't see any more questions from the audience, but I think we're gonna wrap up here for the night on my side. I know you
Yeah.
are getting close to lunchtime on your side, so that's always a good time to wrap up. I will not stand between somebody and lunch for sure.
I'll
Um,
stand between you and sleep as well. So
that
that's
is good. Totally good. I love that.
we
Perfect.
agree. No, no friction at all.
No friction. It's a mark, no friction as well.
Yeah.
But thank you all so much for your time, Rafe and Lars. You know, I always love chatting with you all. Can't wait to
Nice.
see you all again in person sometime soon. Hopefully sometime soon. But always good chatting with two of you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us because you all are gatekeepers in this industry, and you all definitely know what's going on with everything that's happening. I want to thank as well Preeti Prasad for presenting earlier and sharing all of her knowledge, and to our guys from Solar who could not make it today. We probably will have you back at some point in time, and look out for that. Look out for that one. We are going to be having another LRVS EMEA for Europe and the Middle East. The date for that will be on the 6th of November from 9 a.m. to 12 noon Central European time. I do not know what time that'll be for me, but I know what time I'll be in Europe. So, and I know Mark is asking me about some certificates of attendance. We will try and sort you out, Mark. Just send me a quick email and I will figure that out. But thank you all for everybody who stayed up, past your bedtime, or if you had this time during the day, thank you all so much for just staying with us and for always supporting LRVS. We will have the recordings up by the end of the week. Um, I believe they'll be available on YouTube from the moment I close this off. But we will have the actual other recordings by the end of the week. And just thank you all so much for your support because without you, we do not have LRVS. So I know Raj is coming in. And thank you, Raj, because I know you're in Singapore. Have a good day ahead. And thank you all so much. And we will be
Thank
seeing
you.
you around. Yeah?
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, Tanya.
Bye.
Take care.